Hello everybody, welcome to Build or Buy Behind the Scene. Tonight we're going to be looking at a new converter. This is a converter from BlackMagic. It's fairly new. It's the mini converter. It's an UpDownCross HD. Now we have high hopes for this. What it's going to do and what we hope it'll do may be two different things. The reason we have waited is we were waiting for some firmware updates, and there have been a couple of firmware updates since this came out in May. So what we're going to do is we're going to take this out, examine as an unboxing what's in the box. We're going to look at the connections on the converter. Then we're going to compare it to a decimator, an MDHX converter, just to verify that we have signal on that connection. Then I want to see if it's going to work by default, one with a computer and two with a camera as an input converter. Then the next thing we'll do is we're going to update it, because one of the connections on this, as we'll look at, it has, well, the new USB-C. And what I want to try are two different cables, a USB-C to USB cable, standard like USB 3, USB 2, and also one that's Thunderbolt certified so that it's USB-C on both ends. So we're going to open this up and see what we've got. I'm going to take the plastic off of it. So we're down to the box. Now I'm going to change inputs so we can take a look at this overhead while we unbox it. Okay, we're going to have expectations of. We have a converter, we have a power tap, the adapters that go on it because it's international. We'll pull that piece of plastic out so everybody can get a good view at that. And this is the mini UpDownCross HD. Now the original version of this converter does 4K. If you don't do 4K or you don't need 4K, you shouldn't have to pay for 4K. What we're going to find out though is it worth the price. We've got connections left, connections right. It can be rack mounted, and the switches, the dip switches, are on the other side. We're going to take a look at those. We're going to also take a look at the software, and we have a layout on the back of how to set all the dip switches. You need a magnifying glass to see some of that stuff, but we're going to go through that. So that's the converter, that's the power tap, and then we have the international adapters, of which there are 4. We only need one. We're going to use the one for US 110 volt. So we're going to take that and we're going to snap that in. I had hoped they'd made some changes or improvements to these power taps, something that when it plugged in, it would not just plug in, but it would plug in and lock. That still does not lock, which is unfortunate. Let me get the packaging here out of the way. And I would strongly encourage you to save the packing for at least 30 days. That way if you've got any issues, you need to send it back. It's easy to get rid of. So the two things that we're concerned with, there's the converter, there's the power tap. Now, to give you an idea of the setup, I'm going to change inputs and I'll show you here on another camera. I'm going to go here to camera 1. We've got one computer up. This is an Intel NUC talking about this converter. We have the Lenovo here in back that we're going to hook up this converter with. And right now the Lenovo is on an input, and if you'll notice, there's an MDHX back here. I've got the multi-view in front so you can see when something comes up or goes away. Now this other screen that's not up right now these are the two we run the graphics on. I shut those graphics on, but I'll put them back on to show you what I'm talking about. That's where those are at. Okay, and this monitor over here at the top, if you'll notice right up here, this monitor is going to be for this converter because we have the ability with this converter to have HDMI out. What I want to find out, and that to me is an important part of a converter, is will we get HDMI out with this? So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to verify for connection. And if you notice on input 1 here on the multi-view where it says Lenovo, that is that Lenovo. I'll bring that up on screen. That's that input. Okay, now what we're going to do is we're going to disconnect that converter, which is the MDHX. We verified the connection works. And it's important to know you're delivering your payload. We are 1080i 59.94, the default, SMPTE level B. And this will also be set for that same default. So let's see if it's going to work. We'll get the power tap out, plug in power, we'll plug in the converter, and I'm going to switch to a camera where you'll be able to have a better view. Let me go to camera 3. And you'll be able to see this a whole lot better. Okay, we've got power plugged in, and what we're going to now do is we're going to take our SDI out. We're going to plug SDI out in here. We're going to see if this converter is set up by default to do what we want, and see if it'll even work. So SDI out. On this right side, We have SDI out that I plugged into. We have a secondary SDI out. We have a HDMI out. So these are all out. So we'll be plugging the monitor into that eventually. And on the input side, on the left side, we have SDI in, SDI loop to loop through, HDMI in, and a reference signal if we want to send a reference. And of course the switches are on top. So we're going to unplug the laptop, which is back here on the decimator. And what we want to see is up here on input 1. And what I'll do is I'll put here on the preview input 1, and we'll see if it'll cue for us. We're going to find out. So we're going to unplug the laptop, HDMI. We're going to do input, nothing. So we took that laptop, HDMI in, SDI out. So by default, this will not work the way we want. So what we've got to do is go take a look at the switches and see what's required to get this to set the way we want to set it. And then we're going to take a look at the software and do the firmware upgrades to it and see how that performs. So I'm going to flip this over. We'll take that to the other camera so you can see the back of this. We'll put that on camera 4. And I'm going to zoom in on that so you can read this better. Okay. On. And the signal we're looking for is 1080. In fact, I may be able to read it better from the camera than I am trying to look at it. We're looking for 1080i 59.94. And it should be 1080i 60, 1080i 59.94. And if you'll notice, all the switches, let me turn this so you can see it. All the switches are up right now. And I need a screwdriver for that. Okay, I've got me some needlepoint screwdrivers. I thought I could reach that with my nimble fingers. Not going to happen. Okay, 1 is on. 5 and 6 is supposed to be on. Okay, so the switches by default, and this is the first time I've looked at this converter. The switches by default are all off, and if they're all off, then there's no processing going on. So what we did is we looked for our format we're looking at, and we verified our signal with our MDHX so that we know we have a good connection. And we're looking at our panel on the back, and our schematic says 1080i 59.94, and the switches read, to me that's backwards unless you turn it around. 1080i 59.94. 1 is on, 5 and 6 is on. So we'll turn this around. 1 is on, 5 and 6 are on. I'm going to take this now and turn that, because if you'll notice here on the multi-view, let me put you back where you can see a multi-view, and I will show you that that computer is now up. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn that back off, and I'm going to give you camera 1 so you can see a better view here. I'm going to set those switches back to the default, and what you're going to be able to see here on input 1 and also in the preview, that's going to go dark because I'm going to set those back to the default. All switches off. As soon as I hit one of those switches, it goes dark. I turn on 1, 5, 6. I turned on 1, 5, and 6, and as you'll notice, we have signal. Now the next question is, with this monitor we have over here, well, I want to know, will we get HDMI coming out of that converter? With a laptop, it's pretty easy, simple, and straightforward, but when you have a desktop, you don't want to have to hook up multiple monitors. If you can bring your monitor out of the converter straight to one monitor, that's the way to do a desktop, and that's why I want to have HDMI out. So I'm going to take a look at that, and let's see if that's going to work. So I'm going to, with this monitor, HDMI, I already have it set, it's plugged in and ready to go. We're going to turn the converter around, and we'll do HDMI out. I hope you find this information useful when you're trying to set up, because when you're setting up, you don't have time to monkey with stuff. It's got to work. And if something doesn't work out of the box, you have to figure out why, what's going on. And we have signal on that monitor. So if you'll notice, not bad. I'm impressed. Now this is with the default firmware. All I'm doing is out of a Lenovo Flex 5. I verified my signal with the decimator MDHX converter so that I knew everything was good. I then plugged in the BlackMagic mini up-down cross converter, and this gives me 1080 signal. The other version of this that came out first was the one that does 4K. We don't do 4K, we don't need 4K, so why pay for 4K? We need 1080, 1080i 59.94, and that's what we're getting out of this. So when we unplugged from the MDHX, we plugged in our SDI connection first, then we plugged in our laptop, HDMI, input, then we looked at the pattern on the back, changed our switches. We had 3 switches to set. Number 1, 5, and 6. As soon as we hit 6, it came up. Then we plugged in this monitor right over here to verify we have signal. Now the next thing I want to do, we've got a laptop plugged in. I want to take a camera right here. This is a nice little camera. I keep a strap on this because I use this for its portability outside. I've had some difficulty with the G40s because they have to have a converter. And in a previous video we showed comparing a G40 to an XA35. And in fact, in the next video after this, we're going to take a look at an XA15. But to stay on topic with this as it relates to this converter, now that we've done a laptop, I want to see what this looks like with a camera. Because coming out of an MDHX converter, it's a little fuzzy. I want to see how it looks with this camera, with this converter. So I've got to change my cables. I've got a battery on the camera, so this is going to come up fairly quick. So what I want to try to do is get this where it'll work and stay out of the way. This is one thing I don't like about this camera. You have to use the mini HDMI camera, and for what it's worth, I don't use the stock cables that come with the cameras. I think they're too heavy. HDMI is a very fragile connection. These cables on Amazon are made by Kayo, K-A-Y-O. I've got another brand I use. This just happens to be the one I'm using right now. So I'm going to plug this in. I'm going to turn this camera on. I'm going to need to set it down so whatever it's looking at may look a little bit strange until I can take the HDMI input. See if my cable's long enough for me. I'm in a really tight space because I'm trying to show you a lot of information that I hope you'll find helpful. So we're going to unplug HDMI in. So we're going to lose this signal here, input 1 and also the preview. So when I unplug HDMI, those go dead. We'll still have focus. We're going to plug in this camera. Let's see what we get. And we got camera. Now the next question is, how crisp and clear is it? So far, not bad. And the reason I mention that, my question is, do I still need to use an MDHX converter, or can I use a BlackMagic converter? This is with the shipping default firmware I have not updated. And that's what that converter, that's what that camera looks like through that converter. That is crisper output than I was getting through the MDHX. Wow. I'm pleased. I'm impressed. Now, I will say I have read that some people that have like a GoPro camera are having trouble for whatever reason. So my first suggestion would be to update to the latest firmware. BlackMagic converters are finicky with some equipment. Now this camera is pretty straightforward. It's easy to get a 1080p signal to a 1080i, and so whatever's going on with the GoPros, if everybody's pointing fingers at each other, if you can't get a BlackMagic converter to work like we're showing with this camera, stick with the MDHX. They're bulletproof. The output is a little bit fuzzy, but man, that is crisp. I have a new favorite converter now for the, wow, can't believe it. I'm really pleased. I have a new favorite converter for the Canon G40. But I will say, if you're thinking about buying a G40 versus the XA35, I prefer the XA35, but in the next video we're going to take a look at the XA15. But that just really looks good to me. Okay, so I'm going to turn this camera off and set it down, because the next thing I'm going to do, for what it's worth, is I want to check the firmware. I want to try it with 2 different cables. I know some converters are really finicky about how they do that, whether you're using a USB 2, USB 3 port, and so we're going to find out. So let me set this down. I'll turn it off. That goes out. That was impressive. Now I'm doing this live, so we've experienced this together, and so you get some idea of what you're dealing with. I look at an event that I've got 15 minutes to solve a problem. All problems. If I can't solve it in 15 minutes, I can't solve it. I've got to go to plan B. With this converter, 3 switches to set, and we're in business. So I'm going to plug this back into the laptop. Get that cable out of the way. Now these other cables I'm using are Sanus cables. I've had really good luck with them. They come in 2 links, and they do the job. So I'm going to go back to the camera number 4 so we can do an overhead shot, and you can get a better view of that. Okay. Now for the 2 cables we're going to try, and I'll show you here what I'm talking about. I'll get these cables up here where you can see them. Here's a regular cable. This would be like your standard USB. I'll get that up there where you can see it. And there's your other end, which is USB-C. What I want to know is can I use a cable like this? And yes, that does get hot. That's a hot converter. All the BlackMagic converters get hot. It's just the way they work. Or here's a cable that's got USB-C on both ends. This cable is also certified, if you notice the lightning mark, it's certified for Thunderbolt. So what I want to do is I'm going to try both cables. I'm going to start with this cable, and then I'll try this cable. Now, I have the firmware on this little stick. So what we're going to do is we're going to go over to the Lenovo, and I'll put that up, which is on input 1. We'll flip that over. We're going to install this software on the hard drive. It's always a good idea to copy the software to the hard drive before you try to install. And the reason I say that, a lot of software programs, let me get back around to camera number 1. Okay. A lot of software programs, when they install, you got an install that does another install. So what I'm saying is it takes itself because it has to uncompress. You don't want that trying to run from the installation media or from the USB drive. Take that file, copy to the hard drive, let it uncompress. Don't try to do it over the network because you can get into trouble with that too. Copy to the local machine that you're going to run it on, and then let it do its thing. So let's go back over. Okay, it popped up. I'm going to take that software. I've got shows the 2 versions. So I'm going to copy this to the hard drive. And I have a particular way I install things where I create a path that to me is familiar. It's just a force of habit. So when I do this on a computer, I know what I'm looking for, and I know where I'm looking for it at. So I'm going to create a folder for drivers. I'm going to copy this stuff off. And what I'll do is I'll install the first one. The computer's going to have to go through a reboot. This is 7.31, so we're going to install these converters. The previous version, I believe, was 7.3, and I'm not sure what version this is running. We're going to find out when we plug it in. But we're going to go ahead and install this software and see if we can use it. It'll tell us some of the things they've done. It allows you to set up and update your ATEM converter, micro and mini converter, and this is a mini converter, a DVI extender or open gear converter to the latest software. Improved auto detection of the main or alternate input for mini converter. Mini converter is what we're working for. Now that's an SDI to HDMI 6G. Keep in mind, and this is a good time to mention this, you've got 3G, 6G, and 12G. 3G is 1080. Then you've got 4K 30, 4K 60. And this is mentioning the 6G. Well, 6G, let me back up a little bit. All this with BlackMagic is how you can get the most amount of information through one cable, and not like 4 cables the way some others are doing it. So until that's all sorted out, the BlackMagic spec, 3G is 1080, the 6G is 4K 30, and then the 12G, just to keep it simple, the 12G will give you 4K 60. For example, if I were to show you a 4K TV, it's doing 4K 30. There's special hoops you have to jump through to get it to do 4K 60. For example, if I plug in an HP NV17T, which is a 1080 screen, or if I plug in this Lenovo Flex 5, which is also a 1080 screen, if I plug either of those into a 4K TV, I will get 4K 30 output. There's a setting in the TV, I have to go and change it to do 4K 60, and then some other hoops we have to jump through. So 4K 60 is a big deal. That's a lot of information. And yes, 8K is coming down the pike. Samsung's got a TV out for it. But as it relates to this, I wanted to share with you about this converter. So we're going to install this software, and we're going to accept the EULA, good old EULA, like we have a choice. I expect the computer is probably going to have to reboot. We're going to find out. And once the software is installed, then we're going to try the first cable, which is the lowest common denominator. If you have a new laptop, then you're probably going to have USB-C connection. If you have an older laptop, you probably won't. That's why we're going to test this cable. Okay, click Finish. Didn't have to reboot. So we're going to close that. We should have on the desktop BlackMagic converter set up. Now no converter found. So we're going to plug in a cable. And I'm going to go to another camera. Let's see, I'm going to set on, let's go to camera number 4. I think that'll give you a good view where the connections are on this laptop. Here's the converter. We're going to plug in, let's see, that's the Thunderbolt, USB-C to USB-C. Okay, we're going to use this cable. This is Amazon Basics. Wow, hot as a little red wagon itself. What I'm going to do, so you can see this port on this side, I use an external mouse on any laptop I use. It's just, I got to have my 4 buttons. So 4 button, 5 button mouse. So I'm going to change my mouse, put it on a dongle, because I have one USB 3 port on this side. I want you to be able to see the whole process. We're going to plug this in, and now the converter, I want us to be able to see this. We're going to plug this in, and what we'll see as we're doing this, I'm going to change over to, I'd like for you to be able to see that as I plug it in, so that you know this is happening in real time. The multi-view, I'll put you down here so you can see camera 1. We'll do that. Okay. Now what you're going to see is when I plug in this cable, you should see up here on this monitor something come up. I want you to see this in real time. It should auto recognize, and then we'll go back to the computer. Okay, plugged it in, boom, came right up. Now what we've proved is we can go from a USB 3 port to USB-C port. That cable connection works. We see it on the screen. I'm going to flip back over. You can see where the power connection is. I mean, you can see where that USB-C power connection is at. So we're going to go back to that computer, which is input number 1. And now we're going to see if this will update. And it shows mini converter. And what we want to do is, okay, it shows aspect ratio 16:9 or 4:3. I'm okay with whatever that is. Okay, software version 7.3.1. I don't see it do anything to update. So the only thing we have with this software that we can control is the aspect ratio. I expected to see other things. So to reiterate, if you're going to set up one of these converters, you've got to do it by the jumpers. There's no way to do it with software. And the reason I point that out, there are some converters like the decimators that can be done either way, and also the data video DAC 70s can be done either way. This only goes one way. That's with those jumpers. So all we can do is set aspect ratio. I'm not going to do anything, and I don't see it doing an update of the firmware. So I'm going to cancel that, and I'm really surprised. So now I'm going to log out of that. I'm going to install, first of all, let me unplug the cables. So let me go back over, because I want you to be able to see this live. I'll go to camera 1. Okay, we'll go to camera 1. I'm going to unplug this cable, because now we're going to try the other cable and see if it'll see it, which it should, but just to prove it, I like to know. So we're not plugging this in yet, but we're going to. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go back over to this Lenovo. We're going to update the software. Let me go find it. Downloads. And I put it in a file for drivers. And 732. And let's see what happens. So one of the nice things about any of the BlackMagic equipment, you get updates, and the updates do some amazing things, like for compatibility's sake. Look what they do with the video switch. When the video switches first came out, we had to do those through the USB connection. Then they, lo and behold, fixed it where it would update through the network connection, which is just, I think, phenomenal. Closed caption support. Now this is the latest version, 7.3.2. Closed caption support for the mini converter up-down cross HD, which is what we've got. Improved timecode support for that same converter. General performance and stability improvements. So we should see, and a suitable USB port. So we should see some good changes. So let's install this software, and then we'll plug in the new cable and see what we've got. And see if we say something more than just setting aspect ratio. Okay, did not ask me to reboot, so I'm not going to try it. Won't sweat it. Let me go over to this computer, And I'm going to plug this in real time, and we go from that cable to this cable. And we're going to be using, let's go over to the converter, which is on camera 4. So you can see we're now going to be trying this cable, which is a Thunderbolt cable, so we've got USB-C on both ends. And on this Lenovo Flex 5, we have that. How about you guys? But all these cables you got to have to do all this stuff with. It's a daunting task sometimes. Okay, before I plug that in, we're going to set that second screen so you'll be able to see over there what's going to happen. So I'm going to plug this cable in now. And what we want to do is call up the software. So I'll put the computer over here now, and you're going to see on the computer when that comes up. So let's go find the software. I'll bring that up. Back to BlackMagic. No converter found. Okay. Now, so you see what I'm seeing. And we're going to see this in real time when I plug this cable into this converter, and it should see. And there it is. Okay. Now we're going to see how it sees it and see if we can update it. Okay. This is what I was hoping to see. This is what I expected to see. This converter needs a software update. This converter shipped with one version back, which has been a couple of months. Always keep an idea on your converters in terms of even your decimators. When these things update, you need to have the backup firmware and the new firmware, because sometimes you may install the new firmware and you say, whoa, wait a minute, that messes something up. And as it relates to the decimators, you always want to make a copy of your settings, because it might reset them. With this, I don't see we're going to reset anything. So anyway, as we look at this, this converter needs a software update. Before you can edit the settings of this converter, it must be updated to the latest version. So we're going to update. So let's go for it. Do not unplug the converter while the update is in progress. Updating converter, 37%. Now, we lost main screen, so I'll flip that back over because it's updating the converter. The converter went offline. Once the converter's been updated, boom, it comes back up, and you can see on the external monitor as well as down here on multi-view. The converter has been updated, so we can flip that back. So I'm going to say close, and I see again aspect ratio. So even though the software updated, the only thing I can change is aspect ratio. That's wild, 16:9 or 4:3. If you need to change aspect ratio, that's where it's at. That's the only thing you can change. I don't need to. I'm good with that. If I were to change it, let's see what it does. In terms of that laptop, I'll put it back to 4:3. That was the default. So the only reason to install the software, which I encourage you to do, is for compatibility's sake. But we had this thing working out of the box. But again, we're not using this on a GoPro. If you are trying to use a GoPro, that's something you want to think about. So again, this is the BlackMagic mini converter, UpDownCross converter. I hope you enjoyed this. I appreciate a thumbs up. And we want to thank you for watching. Look forward to seeing you next video. And remember, the next video we're going to be taking a look at another camera, which is the Canon XA35. Appreciate you. Subscribe. If you got any questions, let us hear from you. And we're here to help. Have a great day, and thanks for watching.